My name is Jason, and this is Just Watches. Alright, today we have a watch that I think I have more opinions about than any other watch I've reviewed on the channel. This is the Seiko SZSB016, and it does so many things right and wrong simultaneously that it's honestly sort of bewildering. Anyways, as always, we're going to do specifications, pros, cons, and then if I think this watch is worth the money. But before we begin, if you're enjoying the content of this channel, I invite you to subscribe, and if you like the contents of this individual video, please give it a thumbs up. Thank you so much. So let's tackle price and availability. So as of the recording of this video, this watch is available for about $330 on Amazon and about $283 on Sakura Watches. So that kind of gives you a ballpark figure about what this watch costs that you can keep in mind throughout the video. As for the case, we have a 40mm case diameter, an unusually long 48mm lug-to-lug for a Seiko watch of this size, but the lugs do curve down a lot, which helps with wear, and they are pierced for easy strap changes. It's 12.5mm thick, but about a half a millimeter is that hardlex crystal that does sit proud of the case, and then it is 20mm for the lug width opening here. Now, it's a lot of high polish. We have a high polish bezel, and then we have high polish along the sides. There's not really a chamfered edge, it just kind of transitions into circular brushing along the top of the case. Overall, the brushing is fine. I think I would like to see a little bit heavier brushing on the top of the case. It is quite flashy. There's a lot of polished surfaces on the head of the watch, but it's kind of, the finishing is what you'd expect at this price point. So that brings us to the bracelet and where things start to get weird. It starts out great, 20mm, tapering all the way down to 16mm, which I find is kind of rare on Seiko bracelets. And a heavy taper like that is going to help with comfort in wear and also overall weight of the watch on the bracelet, which size for my 6 3/4 inch wrist is 117 grams. The finishing is good, it's all polished, but then we have a couple oddities here. One, it's nice to see we have a fully milled double push to point clasp. But we don't have any micro positions and we only have 2 half links. So I'm worried not everyone will get a proper fit with this bracelet. There's also a very gigantic gap here on the edge of the clasp. Now it's not that big of a deal. This is going to be on the back of your wrist and not everyone is you're not really going to see it, but that is quite a pronounced gap. It's quite a maw, if you will. It's almost like a mouth on the back of this clasp, and I just feel like they could have done a little bit better there. And then another odd choice is you have hollow end links. Now, hollow end links don't necessarily bother me, but what does bother me on this bracelet in particular is the integration of the end link to the watch head itself. There's a lot of extra lug sticking out there, and it's just a little bit unsightly. The end link doesn't always line up to the head of the watch, but this is pretty bad in this particular example. And then one final note is the sizing does use the pin and collar system, which usually I sort of dread, but in this case the collars were actually springs, and I found it remarkably easy to size this. The 6mm push-pull crown is unsigned, and it's a great size for operating the watch. I just think it sticks out a little far on this watch. I think it's slightly pronounced by those crown guards that also jut out from the side of the case. But I don't know, for whatever reason, the crown just seems to stick out a lot on this case. And I'm not a huge fan of it. So the screw-in exhibition case back is going to help provide 100 meters of water resistance. You have some information around the side there, including Seiko, and then it does display, this is the Seiko 4R35 movement. That's a 21,600 vibration per hour movement. It's going to hack and hand wind. It has a 41-hour power reserve and then a stated accuracy of -20 to +40 seconds per day, although in my experience it's usually much closer to plus or minus 10 seconds a day. And then finally, it does have a quick set date. So this brings me to the next feature of this watch is that just confuses me. So there is a really cool faceted crystal here. It's just hardlex, but you get some nice distortion around the edge. But then it has a cyclops that, as far as I can tell, is 100% aesthetic. It provides 0 magnification. Now, I used to think Steinhardt was really bad about this, but if you compare it to the Steinhardt, you can see that at least the Steinhardt is doing some sort of magnifying there at the date position. The Seiko is doing absolutely no magnification. So why they felt it necessary to design a Cyclops that doesn't perform any function of magnification is beyond me, but that is what they put on the dial for, I guess, aesthetic purposes. So for the dial, in most lighting conditions, it will actually appear black, but when you get it in very bright lights like these studio lights or direct sunlight, it will reveal a very dark sunburst blue, which is a very alluring effect. It's kind of fun when you only get that splash of color in certain lights. Just keep in mind, from the stock photos, it looks like this watch is very blue, but I would say in most lighting conditions, it's either the dial appears black or very dark blue. And then as far as the layout, the indices are kind of unique. They're these round indices, and they are edged in high polish. And they used a double for the 12 o'clock, and then there's one for each hour, of course, sans the 3 o'clock position where they have the date. You have Seiko printed very cleanly at 12 o'clock. And then my one complaint about the dial is you have automatic 23 jewels and 10 bar at the 6 o'clock position, which one is already a lot of text, but two, I think each of those 3 statements is in a different font, which I'm not a huge fan of. I would have loved it if it just said Seiko at 12 and automatic, even in that cursive font at the 6 o'clock position. Now I do love the handset they used here. It's very interesting. So I would call them pencil hands, but they're semi-skeletonized. So half of the hand is skeletonized and the other half is filled with lume. And skeletonized hands are just fun to me. Like right here, you can see through the hand to the dial. And then when the hands overlap each other, you can kind of see the hands stacking up. It just adds a little bit of visual interest. And I just think skeletonized or partially skeletonized hands are really cool. And then they're all edged in high polish. And you can see the minute hand is plenty long. It's going all the way out to the dashes around the edge of the dial. And then I also really like the second hand. It kind of has a double lollipop. So there's a lollipop counterbalance, and then there is a lollipop on the end designating the seconds, and that is also filled with lume. So I really like the attention to detail that they used blue lume here, but I can't help but feel it doesn't have that punch that Seiko Lume usually has, as you can see on the right. So I don't know. I think, is this a Seiko watch with bad lume? It's a very confusing thing for me to say. So popping it on the Timegrapher, it's running about 5 to 7 seconds a day fast, which is great within parameters. They would do, like I said before, very, very conservative -20 to +40 tolerance ranges on these movements, but in my experience, you usually get plus or minus 10 seconds. And then the amplitude is fine, and then there's minimal beat error on this one. So here is the watch on my 6 3/4 inch wrist. You can see that nice tapering bracelet. And then 48 millimeter case size is going to be a crowd pleasing one. 48 millimeters lug to lug, so pretty long, but they do have a nice curve down that's going to help with the overall wear. I do like this watch. I think it looks great on wrist and it is quite comfortable. I'm just a little bit confused about how I feel about it overall. So pros and cons, starting with the pros. Well, I do have some complaints about the bracelet and the overall fit and finish, but it is quite comfortable. It articulates all the way down the back of the watch. It has a nice 4 millimeter taper, and it does have that nice milled clasp. Just keep in mind, with no micro positions and only 2 half links, not everyone will get a perfect size. Second, the watch is a crowd-pleasing 40 millimeters, and I think it's going to wear great on a variety of wrists. Third, I find the design different and fun. Sans the Cyclops, for example, I really like the handset. It's kind of cool. They're semi-skeletonized. You don't see that every day. And then I like this very deep blue dial with that sunburst effect. And then finally, with 100 meters of water resistance, and it's kind of straddling. It's a little bit of a dress watch, a little bit of a field style watch. I think this is a good candidate for a go anywhere, do anything watch. As for cons, the Cyclops deeply offends me. It just doesn't magnify at all. So my number one rule about Cyclopses is they don't bother me if they have good magnification, and this has none, so I hate it. Secondly, the indices seem a bit small overall for the overall layout of the dial. I'd like to see bigger indices, and I think this would also solve the problem of the lume not being super bright. Bigger indices would mean more lume, and I think that would solve both of those problems. And then third, I do like the bracelet, but there's a lot of just fit and finish details with it, like that giant gap in the clasp, and then just how far the lugs overhang the end links. It just doesn't feel like this watch was designed, or this bracelet was designed with this watch in mind. So is this watch worth the money? Well, it's a weird one. It's got some cool things going for it. At the same time, I have a lot of problems with it. So I guess if it speaks to you and you could find this for, you'd want to pay, I think, closer to $250 than $300. And you can get it on bracelet, then I think you're getting a good deal. But overall, this watch doesn't really appeal to me very much. I recognize it's cool and it's different, but it's not going to stay in my collection, that's for sure. So there you have it, the Seiko SZSB016. A little bit of a weird one. Let me know what you think about this watch in the comments below. As always, if you're enjoying the content of this channel, I invite you to subscribe. And if you like the content of this individual video, please give it a thumbs up. That's it for this time. My name is Jason, and you have been watching Just Watches.